Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We will continue our discussion on deadlocks in this lecture also. We continue our discussion from deadlock characterization and consider some more basic facts about deadlock. This is in connection to the resource allocation graph with and without deadlock, as we have seen in previous lecture. So, keeping in view the resource allocation graph, some basic facts to detect a deadlock in the graph should be kept in mind. What are those facts? If the resource allocation graph does not have any circle, so there would be no deadlock. But if there exists a circle, then we have to look for the deadlock breakers. So if there is a cycle, there is a possibility of deadlock. If only single instance of all the resources are there and you detect a cycle, so this is a must deadlock situation. But if more than one instances of resources are there, so then there would be a possibility of deadlock. It may be present or maybe not. What you need to do is to look out for the deadlock breakers, which will take the situation towards a live lock. I hope you will keep these facts in mind when you are going to analyze a resource allocation graph for a deadlock. Next topic of discussion in the outline is methods for handling deadlock. And as you can see, we have different methods for handling deadlock. So we will consider all of them one by one. First method that we will see is deadlock prevention. Then we would go for deadlock avoidance. Then deadlock detection. So let's begin with methods for handling deadlock. Let's now come to different methods for deadlock handling. We have two choices. Either we never allow the system to enter the deadlock situation, the way some of the operating systems do, and they ignore this problem, such as Unix. The main reason for ignoring this problem is that such operating systems are claimed to be more secure. So, due to this tight security, there is no mechanism to handle deadlock, as they expect it would never happen. That's why they ignore it. But this is not always the case with every operating system. So deadlocks do occur. And there should be some mechanism to recover your system from a deadlock state. We are now going to discuss all those mechanisms through which we can recover our system from deadlock. First mechanism is deadlock prevention. Deadlock prevention says prevent the deadlock from occurring. As you must have heard a famous proverb, prevention is better than cure. How prevention can be applied? If one of the four necessary conditions, as we have discussed in previous lecture, for deadlock is eliminated, so deadlock will never happen. As we have said in the previous lecture, that the four necessary conditions for deadlock must occur simultaneously for a deadlock to happen. If any one condition is removed, deadlock will not happen. What were the conditions? Mutual exclusion, hold and wait, no preemption, and circular wait. So we can eliminate those conditions or any one of them. But how? So here is the technique. First condition is mutual exclusion and how we can prevent it. Mutual exclusion says one resource should be used by a single process at a time. In previous chapter, we found mutual exclusion beneficial, but now due to mutual exclusion, deadlock may occur. So how can we prevent it? Since mutual exclusion can't be prevented completely, as this would then make the resource inconsistent. So what can we do now? The solution is we can differentiate among resources by categorizing them in two main categories: the shareable resources and the non-shareable resources. Shareable resources are those which can be accessed by more than one processes at a time, and this will never result in inconsistency of the resource. The best example of such a resource is your internet bandwidth. You can run more than one applications at a time on your internet bandwidth and all work correctly. So this is an example of a shareable resource. While non-shareable resources are those that can be accessed one after another and not concurrently, or the resource inconsistency will result. Such as the printer. You have to use printer on different applications one after another. So mutual exclusion needs to be applied only on the non-shareable resources and should not be applied on the shareable resources. By this, we can prevent mutual exclusion or limit it to some extent, but not completely prevent it. Next condition is hold and wait. Hold and wait says a process is holding a resource and waiting for another resource to be assigned to it. Now, how this condition can be prevented? Operating system must ensure that any process that requests some resource must not hold any other resource. How this can be ensured? Two options are there for it. First, either process requests all its required resources before it starts execution. And if all the requested resources are available, they should be assigned to it. The second option is operating system can allow a process to request a resource only when it is not holding any other resource. So in this way, hold and wait condition can be prevented. By doing so, some of the resources may be underutilized and resource starvation may result, as some of the resources may never be or very rarely be requested. Third condition is no preemption. No preemption states no resource can be taken away from a process forcefully or without its consent. So how this condition can be prevented? If a process requests a resource which is not currently available, so it has to voluntarily release all its held resources. Since it cannot proceed ahead and deadlock may occur due to it. The released resources are then added to the pool of resources and are made available to other processes. The process who has released all its resources will then restart and request all its required resources again to complete its execution. Fourth and the last condition is circular wait. Circular wait can be prevented by assigning numbers to resources, so that processes are allowed to request resource in increasing order of their numbering. I cannot request in decreasing order. For example, a process is holding a resource number 5. So it is allowed to request resource higher in number than 5, such as resource 6, resource 7, resource 8, and so on. But it cannot request resources lower than 5, such as resource 4, resource 3, resource 2, and resource number 1. So whenever we detect a circle, first we check the request order of processes. If any process is stuck in cycle has found to have requested reverse ordering of resources, it would be removed from the system and all its held resources will be released. So in this way, we can remove the circles in the graphs. Next mechanism for deadlock handling is deadlock avoidance. Deadlock avoidance requires some information in advance. And the information is that every process declares its required or maximum demand of resources right from the start of its execution. The deadlock avoidance algorithm then examines the resource allocation state to monitor the circular wait that may lead to deadlock. And hence, the algorithm ensures that circular wait never occurs. Resource allocation state is defined by the number of available, allocated resources and the maximum demand of all the processes. This information will be required for the deadlock avoidance algorithm. Now we need to define safe and unsafe state for the resource allocation and differentiate among the two states. When a process requests a resource, operating system first analyzes if the immediate allocation of the resource to the process will leave the system in safe or unsafe state. If it is a safe state, resource is allocated. But if it is unsafe state, the request is not granted. Safe state can be represented if all the processes are representing a safe sequence. Safe sequence of processes is if the resources requested by a process can be satisfied by the available resources as well as resources held by other processes. If immediate request cannot be granted, the process must wait until another process completes its execution. But they are not making a circle, keep in mind. When resource is available, it is assigned to the process requesting it, which after utilizing would release the resource, and then other process requesting the same resource would avail it, and hence this process continues and does not create a deadlock. This sequence of processes is known as safe sequence. Some basic facts need to be kept in mind related to the safe state. If the system is in safe state, having safe sequence of processes, so there would never be any deadlock. But if the system is in unsafe state, where processes do not have safe sequence, so there will be a possibility of deadlock. Deadlock avoidance algorithm ensures that system will never enter the unsafe state. There is very slight difference or margin in safe and unsafe states. One single process can make system to enter the unsafe state where there is a possibility of deadlock, while safe state is deadlock free, as you can see in the figure. Now we enhance the resource allocation graph. Here I introduce another edge. As I mentioned in previous lecture, that there is another edge besides request and assignment edge. This new edge is called as claim edge that directs from process to resource, but it is drawn as a dashed edge. Otherwise, it would be same as a request edge. When claim is being requested by the process, so the claim edge is converted to a request edge. And when the request has been granted, so the request edge will then be converted to assignment edge. When a resource has been utilized and released by the process, the assignment edge then goes back to claim edge. As mentioned earlier, deadlock avoidance requires some information in advance. So the claim to resources should be submitted before a process starts execution. This is resource allocation graph for deadlock avoidance, and you can see the claim edge the dashed edge drawn from two processes P1 and P2 towards resource R2. That means process P1 and P2 in advance has informed operating system that they would require resource R2 in future. When a process originally makes request to a resource, the claim edge is converted to request edge, and when the request is granted, so the request edge is then converted to assignment edge. As you can see here, let me highlight it. You can see resource R2, which was claimed by process P2 and P1, but now it has been assigned to process P2. In this resource allocation graph, we can observe unsafe sequence of processes as a circle can be observed. You can see the circle. Let me draw it. P1 is waiting for a resource held by P2. P2 is waiting for a resource held by P1. So, a circle can be seen. So, this is an unsafe sequence of processes, as we can observe the circle. So, if resource R2 is assigned to P2, the system will go in unsafe state and it may enter in deadlock. But if the same resource R2 would have been assigned first to process P1, the system would have remained in safe state and there would have never been a deadlock, since they would never make a circle. That is all for now. We will continue this discussion in next lecture. I thank you all.